Good afternoon, everyone. Delighted to be with you to moderate a discussion on transforming ambitions, realigning economies for a resilient, inclusive, and prosperous future. I am delighted to welcome three speakers with vast experience of the energy transition and with very different perspectives and insights on the topic. By my side is Boodhai, Chief Industry Officer at Sustainable Markets Initiative, Professor Chung, Nobel Prize Laureate and Board Director of the Ban Ki-moon Foundation, and Bernard Dagher, Chief Strategy and Growth Officer, Middle East and Africa, Grid Solutions at GE Vernova. And please join me in extending a very warm welcome to our guests this afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us. So some context to kickstart this conversation. A transition is indeed always a moving landscape. It requires constant adjustments. There are setbacks, but there are also milestones and causes for celebration. And here's one. For the first time, back in 2023, global renewable energy generation exceeded 40% of the world's total electricity. And the International Energy Agency predicts that global renewable capacity will increase over 5.5 gigawatts during the period of 6 years between 2024 and 2030. Now that's 2.6 times more than in the 6 years before that. So how do we pursue this momentum and maximize the economic benefits of the energy transition to create more jobs and create more resilient economies? So Chan, to start with, I am turning to you to kickstart this dialogue because the Sustainable Markets Initiative aims to mobilize the private sector around the transition. And given the recent political shift, or noise, some may say, by some governments and some businesses too, around sustainability targets, and the fact that energy needs are changing. We've talked about AI this morning, of course, and the need for very energy-hungry data centers. How can we ensure that this momentum does not decelerate, that we remain ambitious, but also ensure a just transition? And I have a second part to my question, because what's important is capital and finance, of course. So what innovative financing mechanisms and partnerships can be developed to not lose that momentum and keep investing in the transition?
So thank you very much, Charlotte, and delighted to be here today with you, Professor Chung and Bernard. And assalamu alaikum, everyone in the audience. It's great to be here in the UAE. So as Charlotte said, I'm from the Sustainable Markets Initiative, or as we fondly call it, the SMI. And for those of you who don't know what it is, I'll just spend 2 seconds on what we do. So the SMI was founded by His Majesty King Charles III in 2020, when he was the Prince of Wales. And it's exactly 5 years this month since the initiative was founded, so it's our 5th year anniversary. The SMI is considered the go-to private sector organization to enable creation of a sustainable future. That's the mission. It's a CEO member-led organization. We have over 250 CEOs, including the CEO of Masdar, Mr. Al Ramahi, who we're very grateful for his support and partnership on this. So Charlotte, as you said, I think we do have to acknowledge the reality is there is a shift on the sentiment towards sustainability, but we remain very optimistic. In fact, at the SMI, we consider it the growth story of our time, where we see unprecedented opportunities to develop the economic, the green economy, new sustainable industries, and also exciting new jobs. So we remain very optimistic. What we do need, though, to continue the momentum while the transition has slowed somehow is positive and strong market signals, our demand signals. And the private sector always responds to positive demand signals. It's our job. So I'll give a simple example. It's the topic of the day, AI and energy. To enable the growth of AI, we all know we need to enable the growth of energy. And we're seeing some really cool and collaborative deals coming out between the energy companies and the technology companies to satisfy that demand. And that's the momentum we need to tap into. The private sector will respond, give us the positive demand signals, and the momentum won't be reduced. Now, on your second question on capital and finance, I agree, we do need to be very innovative, in particular for the emerging and developing economies where priorities are just different from the developed world. So what I would say on this is blended finance becomes quite a vital tool. And what we've observed with transition projects is they really struggle in the early phases. So we do need substantial investment to make the transition a success. However, it can't be borne by the public services alone. We need the private sector with us on this. But if we can have donor governments given concessional finance in the early stages of these projects, you know, where you have your technical analysis or your feasibility studies to get done, the projects become more understood. They become clearer in terms of their impact on the planet, but impacts commercially. And then the private sector is willing to route funds into those projects once, you know, the picture is shown. So we've done a great piece of work at the SMI. It's on blended finance. You can find it on our website. It gives great case studies on how this can be done.
Thank you very much. So let's ask the private sector what they think. With you, Bernard, of course. It's essential during this transition, of course, to ensure that grid stability and energy security is maintained. That's your job, of course. So how can governments and local authorities create policy frameworks that respond to the current market dynamics in terms of demand spike, for instance, and supply chain bottlenecks? They happen, of course, across the full energy value chain, from generation to distribution. And shall we be a bit more pragmatic, maybe, and accept the need for a more tailored energy mix, have a more holistic view of the transition with more distributed energy systems?
Thank you again for having me today, and it's a pleasure to be here representing GE Vernova, which is a company really a leader in the energy transition business, where our mission is really to electrify and decarbonize the world. So very relevant topic, and most of our activities are into helping governments and nations with their transition. You've mentioned a couple of points regarding this transition, which relate to the bottlenecks in the supply chain, and I think we need to move slightly to a more holistic approach. I mean, if I want to think about the solutions that we will need to do, I think we need holistic, inclusive, and fast solutions to be deployed. And I'm going to elaborate a little bit on these three items. So if you think about the butterfly effect, when one item eventually causes a huge impact somewhere else, today what we've been trying to do on the environmental side is to tackle many problems from a siloed approach. So we're asking governments or countries to do something, companies, private sector, without really looking holistically at what is really taking precedence over the other. I'll give a small example today. If I have a fleet of cars, 1,000 cars, if I move them to electric cars, automatically I got the credit of moving to green. But if these cars are being charged from a coal plant, did I really solve anything? So we go. If I use green electrons to actually charge these cars in a supply constraint world or market, I've actually taken that power from somewhere else. And this is what's happening today. When we say I'm clear on scope 1, most of the companies, unfortunately, are pushing them to scope 2, and scope 2 is being pushed to scope 3, which is tough to measure. So in my mind, we live under one roof. There is no point of having half of the room smoking and the other half not smoking. We really need to solve holistically for the equation of reducing carbon emissions. And we do that by establishing global priorities. So I think we don't lack willingness or intent to do action, and it's been shown a lot. But we need orchestrated efforts. We need a conductor to make sure that the efforts that we're all doing are actually optimizing the end goal, rather than sub-optimizing on metrics that can be measured only. By doing that, we start tackling the problem at a faster pace. So today, again, I can give you an example. The time factor is so important because having a solution that is less polluted by 50% today could be better than having one that is 70% less polluted 10 years from now. So are we factoring in the time impact that we're having? Are we leveraging all the resources, all the fuel types that we have? I think The problem is no longer an or, this or that or that. The problem statement is a matter of how can we solve holistically and how can we add to each other? How can we collaborate to ensure that we have the best solution? Is not one solution, it's the inclusion of all solutions at the same time, given the dynamics that we have globally. And the other bottleneck which we look at is really the grid that you mentioned, right? So yes, we can talk about generation, and especially the electrical industry is hit by two opposing dynamics. We are electrifying a lot of industries. So you're pushing more demand on the electrical industry, and on top of this, the AI and data center new trend. So you have 1 billion people without access to electricity. So all of these you're trying to solve. Access to power, the increase in demand, plus you need to decarbonize in a place where the grid is not built for such two-way protocols in terms of generating and consuming. So we need to work holistically across all these fields, I think.
So we have a series of conundrums to solve all at once, at the same time, of course. So Professor Chung, your own energy transition journey started a very long time ago, back in the early 90s. And I'm hoping to get the macro perspective from you here, because you argue that the energy transition requires a switch from a free market to a sustainable market. So I'd like you maybe to explain what you mean by that exactly, and why you think the top-down approach we have been adopting for decades now is not sufficient, why voluntary consumer participation is key, according to you, and maybe tell us more about this Me First social media campaign.
Okay. First of all, it is my great pleasure to join this very prestigious stage where the vision and the leadership of UAE in leading the sustainability around the world. So it is my great pleasure to be here. And I have been involved in climate negotiation and the UN climate work since 1991 and until the Paris in 2015. So during the 3 decades of my involvement in the UN climate regime and the COP exercises for a long time, my observation is that so far we have been pushing, but mainly focusing on top-down by the government, which means NDC, Nationally Determined Contribution, and also emphasizing the ESG of the business, like a sustainable market initiative for the private sector or technology from the business sector. But one missing piece in solving this, of scaling the ambition, is consumer. How to engage consumers to shared responsibility. It cannot be done only by the government. It cannot be only done by the business alone. Without the sharing responsibility by the consumers, this is what I call bottom-up approach. And for that, luckily, recently, there's a huge change in the consumer demands. I have been witnessing around the world, the consumers are looking for green energy, and they are willing to pay even higher price for green energy, for peace of their mind, for the climate disaster issue. So around the world, not only just consumers, but even the businesses are willing to pay and use green energy in spite of the higher prices, because for businesses, it can give them higher marketing, branding power, improving their branding power if they use green energy. So new opportunity or new pull by the consumers and the businesses from the bottom up, and the focusing on the demand side, not only just the supply side by the technology and the private sector, but the demand side, meaning that consumers are demanding carbon-free and green energy, and that they are willing to pay a higher price for it. So we should seize this opportunity to use it, turn it around as a business opportunity or investment opportunity. In the case of Korea, 48% of the Koreans said that they are willing to pay double the price of electricity for green energy. 45% say no. So my proposal is that why don't we start with the 48% on a voluntary basis? This is what I call, in the free market system, we are competing for the cheapest price. But what I mean by sustainable market is that we have to compete for the quality, not just the cheapest price. Quality meaning that green energy and brown energy should have a different price. And green energy should have a higher price. People should be willing to pay for it. And this is what I call quality competition, not just price competition. So when increasing number of consumers are willing to pay higher price for green energy, then even businesses can make investment and money, profit out of this newly emerging consumers are demanding green energy. So this will be a new opportunity, and in order to encourage this kind of new trends by the consumers, I believe that we need, first, we need a price differentiation between green energy and the carbon energy, so that we can give a choice for the consumers to choose. So price differentiation is a number one, systemic change necessary, economic system change. Number two is we need not only just economic approach, but we need a social approach, encouraging consumers to make a right choice, meaning that paying the right price for the green energy. So I call it Me First campaign. I should be the first to share the responsibility. And I call it Me PDC, personally determine the contribution, not just the NDC. Without PDC, there will not be NDC possible. But I see increasing optimism because many people, increasing number of young generation, consumers and businesses are willing to, like a sustainable market initiative, increasing number of businesses are willing to choose green energy. So this is something I am focusing on in scaling up our ambition. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm not sure what our other speakers or guests have to say about the matter, but your approach sounds almost contrarian when many studies have shown that consumers want to be good, but when it comes to actually paying the bill, cost is often the key factor. But Bernard, I'd like to go back to maybe more concrete examples of the transition at play with you, if possible. Could you share maybe real examples of unlocking projects and facilitating technology transfer, knowledge sharing, and capacity building in the energy sector, more collaboration to accelerate the global switch to low-carbon economy, to the low-carbon economy?
So again, we were talking about the resource constraints, and this comes not only for our industry because, again, there is that merger between IT and OT. Today, we compete for the same raw material with, let's say, electric car industries. We compete for the same talent with tech companies. So the world becoming very global, and there is a shortage of resources needed. So we really are trying to work with governments and countries to see how we can bring their talent, in-country talent, up to the level. Recently, we had a major success in Algeria. I can talk about that a little bit. This was a gas turbine manufacturing facility, and recognizing the bottleneck in the grid system, we expanded that facility to include switch gears and grid automation. And with a 5-year plan of training the team in Algeria to come up to speed and become more self-sufficient, let's say, in terms of that energy. And this is very important because this allows the planning, shaving off the peaks of the demand. Today, when you have, I don't think we have a systemic issue with the supply, but rather the timing, which is everybody wants to do the same thing at the same time. This long-term planning will allow the industries to adjust their production facilities, to localize, to help provide more access. So this is, I think, a good way of expanding capacity by working with local countries to improve their access to technology and products, basically.
And if I could just add to that, Charlotte, I think Bernard and Professor Chung, they're absolutely right. We need coordinated leadership efforts in this space. It won't happen in isolation or on its own. And we need to look at the transition of the green economy as an ecosystem and as an end-to-end value chain starting from the producer all the way to the consumer. Otherwise, there will be gaps. And a simple example would be in the aviation industry. In order to decarbonize aviation, we need sustainable aviation fuel or SAF. You can scale up SAF, but if the airports are not ready or you don't have the specifications for using the fuel like you have jet fuel today, then there'll continue to be a gap. You won't be able to decarbonize aviation. So unless you look at it on the end-to-end value chain, producer to consumer, it won't transition in a smooth way.
Absolutely. Yes, please go ahead.
Actually, since you are talking about a specific example, I have a very interesting success story. Patagonia, the fashion brand. Patagonia is an example of sustainability can make business. And they are using recycled plastic and selling the product at higher price, not cheaper price. Still, consumers are buying it. I call it voluntary market and the voluntary choice by the consumers who are aware about the sustainability issue. We should encourage, I call this kind of thing is voluntary market, because in transformation from free market to sustainable market, we can jump. In the middle, we need a voluntary market where the conscious people, consumers, can make a voluntary choice first. And I hope these consumers, they can inspire the rest of the society so that they can follow and join them.
Thank you very much. And Professor, I'd like to maybe elaborate on this green growth paradigm you worked on so much decades ago. What strategies, in your view, could be implemented to address the social and economic impact of the energy transition, which I promised to address during this panel?
Yes. Actually, I have been proposing the green growth idea. It's a new paradigm, turning the climate crisis into business opportunity, investment opportunity, and the job creation. That has been, I've been proposing it since 2005, and it has been spread out since then. But so far, it is an uphill battle. Why the uphill battle? Because of the free market system. Majority of the market is competing for cheapest price, and is short term, and very difficult to go over time gap between short term and the long term. All our sustainability issues are long term, but typically businesses cannot wait 20 years because business has to make money in 1, 2, 3, 5 years. So this is a time gap issue. Then how can we close this time gap? We need the government support, also innovation technology, but at the same time, consumer understanding and the consumer support by paying the higher price for transition. Consumers, ultimately, it is the consumers. They have to take the cost. We cannot just rely on government and the business to absorb the cost. We are enjoying the services and the products, and the consumers should be ready to take the responsibility. We cannot just finger-pointing government and the business to take all the responsibility. So now is a time for consumer revolution.
A consumer revolution. Thank you very much. It's time to wrap up this conversation, unfortunately, but before we go, I would like you all to maybe share your message with the audience here and online, of course, or maybe a simple call to action.
From the SMI's perspective, our call to action would be the energy transition or the transition to a sustainable world cannot happen in isolation. So we need to continue collaborating within the private sector, in particular between industry and finance, and with governments to show, enable the policy developments, but it needs to be coordinated so it's not chaotic.
Thank you. Professor Chung. Or Bernard.
Yeah. For me, increasing number of consumers are looking for opportunities to share the responsibility, but they are frustrated that there's no such a system available. So we have to design price differentiation between green choices and the brown choices so that consumers can make choice. So now the consumer has to raise a voice, give us a system change that we can exercise our voting right to choose green choice. Because at the moment, green and brown energies are at the same price. There's no differentiation. We want price differentiation between the green and the brown choices.
Consumer empowerment through price differentiation. Thank you very much, Bernard.
Yeah, I mean, again, just to add on what has been said already, I think it is a team sport. It's not going to be an individual contribution by any means, and it will cover the industries, the private sector, the government sector, and the consumer, to what Professor Chung was saying. So we need a holistic 360 degrees approach, and we need to change our time horizon of looking at things. While we know that 2050 is a long time from now, but most of the people who are actually driving the strategies might not be, I mean, I will not be in the working field 20 years from now, so we need to really work on the young generation from the school, change that. This should become a cultural shift, and because they will see those actions being actually fulfilled. So let's make sure that we change the culture so that we have the 360 degrees collaboration between all parties for a successful future.
Many thanks to you, Bernard, Professor Chung, and Chan, of course, for being with us this afternoon. Many thanks for a great discussion on the energy transition. Thank you.